The voice of Senior Chief Miller crackled through the static, a sound stripped of all hope. "Jack, be advised, exfil is not an option. They have the high ground. It's too late." Those two words, "too late," hung in the sterile, oxygen-rich air of Captain Eva Rostova's cockpit like a physical blow. She was hundreds of miles away, a ghost in the night sky. But the desperation in that man's voice was as clear as the stars on her canopy. Her mission briefing had been simple, a routine aerial presence patrol over a sector that had been quiet for weeks. But in war, quiet never lasts. The emergency alert had flashed on her multifunction display, a frantic beacon from the Alisfar Dam. A small SEAL team, call sign Mako, was on the verge of being overrun. Enemy armor, a company of T-72 tanks, was advancing to capture the strategic structure, a dam that held back a reservoir serving 1 million people downstream. The SEAL's orders were to hold, an impossible task against such force. Eva's fingers danced across the console, bringing up the tactical data link. The dam appeared on her screen, a stark white schematic against the dark terrain. Red icons, hostile forces, clustered around it like blood clots around a heart. The green icon representing Mako team was flickering, weak, surrounded. She adjusted her course, her thumb hovering over the comms switch. She had her orders. Sector 7. But Sector 7 was now a quiet graveyard compared to the storm raging at the dam. She listened to the radio traffic, her stomach tightening. The Joint Tactical Air Controller, the voice of reason and rules from a distant command post, was speaking, his tone grimly professional. "Mako, all available air support is engaged in the northern push. Nearest asset is 30 minutes out. You are ordered to exfiltrate if possible." There was a burst of gunfire over Mako's open mic, the sharp, distinctive crack of M4s answered by the heavier roar of AK-47s. Senior Chief Miller's voice came back, strained, breathless. "JTAC, be advised. They have us in a kill zone. The only exfil route is under direct fire. It's too late." Eva made her decision. It wasn't a dramatic Hollywood choice. It was a cold, calculated assessment. The dam was critical. The men on the ground were critical. She had fuel, she had ordnance, and she had a very particular set of skills. She keyed her mic. "JTAC, this is Reaper, A-10C on station. I have a visual on the dam and am painting multiple armored targets." There was a pause on the other end. The JTAC's voice returned, cautious. "Reaper, your assigned patrol sector is 7. Acknowledge." Eva took a deep breath. She could see the thermal signatures of the tanks on her targeting pod. Hot metal beasts moving with purpose. She could almost feel the pressure those men on the ground were under. "JTAC, I am visual on Mako's position. The tactical situation is critical. Requesting immediate permission to engage." The silence that followed was longer this time, filled only with the hum of her engines and the faint, horrifying sound of a battle happening far below. The JTAC was weighing the rules of engagement against the certain death of an entire team. Finally, the radio crackled back to life. "Reaper, you are cleared hot. Godspeed." Eva pushed the throttle forward. The twin turbofan engines responded with a deep-throated roar. The landscape below began to stream past faster. She was no longer just a pilot on patrol. She was the only thing standing between those men and oblivion. The targeting reticle glowed green on her heads-up display. The night was about to get very, very loud. The deep-throated roar of the A-10's engines was the only sound Eva heard as she began her descent. The cockpit was a bubble of focused calm, a stark contrast to the chaos she was flying towards. Her eyes scanned the instruments, a practice dance between the fuel gauge, the weapons panel, and the targeting pod display. On that screen, the thermal ghosts of the enemy tanks were becoming clearer, hotter. They were forming a semicircle around the massive concrete abutment of the dam's control station. That was where Mako had to be. She could see no green icons, no friendly signals. They were completely surrounded, pinned down. Her mind, for a fleeting second, was not in the cockpit over a foreign desert. It was in a dusty hospital room years ago, holding her younger brother's hand. His unit had been left without air support, caught in an ambush. He had survived, but he was never the same. The hollow look in his eyes, the frustration at being left vulnerable, had been the driving force behind her transfer to the A-10 program. It was an aircraft built for one thing above all else: protecting the people on the ground. It was a promise she had made to herself, a silent oath she repeated every time she strapped into the cockpit. No one gets left behind. Not on my watch. The JTAC's voice returned, slicing through the memory. Reaper, be advised. Mako is completely comms dark. Last transmission indicated heavy small arms fire and RPGs inside the control house structure. We have lost all telemetry. The words were a bucket of cold water. Comms dark. It was the worst-case scenario. It meant she was flying blind with no one on the ground to talk her onto the target or warn her of immediate threats. She was now the sole architect of this battle. JTAC, copies all. I am commencing my run. I will engage the armor farthest from the control station first. Stand by. Her voice was calm, a monotone that belied the adrenaline coursing through her. She switched her master arm to on. A steady, insistent tone filled her headset. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon, the massive gun around which the entire aircraft was built, was armed and ready. She lined up the pipper on her heads-up display, placing the glowing circle over the thermal signature of a T-72 that was positioned near the dam's access road. It was the lead tank, the spearhead of the assault. On the ground, the world was noise and terror. Senior Chief Miller pressed himself against a cold, concrete wall, the air thick with dust and the acrid smell of cordite. The enemy fire was relentless, chipping away at the building, ricocheting around the room. His team was low on ammunition and hope was lower. Then he heard it, a sound that was different from the diesel engines and Kalashnikovs, a low, growing rumble that built from a whisper to a thunderous drone in a matter of seconds. It was a sound he had heard only in training exercises, a sound that was both terrifying and beautiful. He risked a glance through a shattered window. The A-10 came in so low that for a moment, Miller thought it would clip the dam itself. It was an ugly, purposeful aircraft, a flying tank. It seemed to move with a slow, deliberate menace. Then the world exploded. The sound was not just loud. It was a physical force, a ripping, tearing, earth-shattering BRRRT that lasted for an impossibly long 5 seconds. A line of fire reached down from the aircraft and touched the lead tank. The T-72 didn't just explode. It disintegrated, erupting in a fireball that lit up the entire valley. The enemy advance, which had been a relentless tide, froze. The incoming fire sputtered to a halt, replaced by shouts of confusion and panic. Miller slid down the wall, his ears ringing. He looked at his youngest team member, a sniper whose face was pale with shock and awe. The sniper met his gaze, a slow grin spreading across his dirty face. "Senior Chief!" he yelled over the ringing in their ears. "It's a warthog, a beautiful, ugly warthog." For the first time in hours, Miller felt a flicker of something other than grim acceptance. It was hope. But high above, Ava was already banking hard, her eyes fixed on her next target. The first strike was a success, but the battle was far from over. The enemy now knew she was here. The hope that bloomed on the ground was a luxury Eva could not afford. The fireball from the first tank was already receding in her rearview mirror. Her training took over, a cold, efficient logic that pushed all emotion aside. A successful gun run simply made you a target. She pulled back on the stick, climbing away from the dam, feeling the G-forces press her into her seat. Her eyes never left the targeting pod display. The enemy tanks were scattering, their neat formation broken. But they weren't retreating. They were adapting, moving into the narrow streets of the abandoned maintenance village adjacent to the dam, using the buildings for cover. This was a problem. The GAU-8 cannon was a sledgehammer, not a scalpel. A strafing run through a civilian area, even an abandoned one, was fraught with risk and strict rules of engagement. JTAC Reaper. Target Alpha is destroyed. Remaining armor is dispersing into the village grid. I need positive identification on any remaining hostiles away from civilian structures. The radio silence that answered was deafening. There was no JTAC to clarify. There was no Mako to confirm. She was alone. She banked the warthog into a wide, circling turn, a predator assessing its prey. Her fuel gauge was still acceptable, but her ammunition counter for the cannon told a starker story. That long, satisfying burst had consumed a significant portion of her 30mm rounds. She still had a pair of AGM-65 Maverick missiles under her wings. Precision weapons that could solve the problem of the hidden tanks. But without a spotter on the ground, locking a Maverick onto a target hiding between buildings was nearly impossible. She was a powerful weapon with no one to aim her. Below, Senior Chief Miller understood the sudden silence from the sky. The Warthog was still there, a menacing shadow circling high above, but the thunder was gone. The enemy had stopped their direct assault, but the rattle of small arms fire had started again, closer now. They were using the cover of the buildings to push infantry forward. The tanks were the anvil, but the infantry were the hammer, moving in to finish the job where the A-10 couldn't reach. He had to re-establish contact. He gestured to his comms specialist, whose radio had been damaged in the initial assault. "Hawkins, get that secondary unit online now. We need to talk to our angel up there." Ava continued her orbit, her frustration mounting. She could see the heat signatures of the infantry moving like a swarm through the village. She could see the hot engines of the tanks, partially obscured by concrete and steel. But she couldn't fire. To engage now would be a blind shot, a violation of her orders that could kill civilians or, worse, the SEALs themselves. She was a spectator to a slow-motion defeat. Then a flicker on her radio. A burst of static, then a broken, desperate voice. This is Ma. Do you copy? We are Control House. Infantry advancing from the village. Grid. Hotel 6. The signal dissolved back into static. It was enough. Grid Hotel 6. She punched the coordinates into her system. The targeting pod slewed to the eastern edge of the village. There she saw it clearly. A squad of at least 12 infantry, moving tactically from building to building, their path leading directly to the rear entrance of the control station. They were the immediate threat. The tanks could wait. She didn't need the cannon for this. She selected her rockets. They were area denial weapons, less precise than a Maverick, but perfect for sowing chaos and breaking up an infantry advance. She pushed the nose down, beginning her attack dive. This run would be lower, faster, more dangerous. The enemy on the ground would be ready this time. She could already see small, bright flashes from the village streets. Small arms fire aimed at her. Tracers arced lazily upward, then streaked past her canopy with terrifying speed. She ignored them, her focus entirely on the cluster of heat signatures in Grid Hotel 6. She waited for the tone, her thumb hovering over the release button. The control house was now dangerously close in her windscreen. She had one chance to get this right. The tracers streaked past her canopy like angry fireflies, a lethal light show meant to distract her. But Ava's world had narrowed to the glowing pipper on her heads-up display and the cluster of heat signatures on the ground. The whine of the A-10's dive was a steady note in her ears, a counterpoint to the frantic thumping of her own heart. She could see the individual buildings now, the shattered windows and crumbling walls of the abandoned village. The infantry squad was moments from reaching the tree line that offered a clear path to the control house's vulnerable rear entrance. She held her breath, waiting for the perfect moment, the target almost filling her screen. The release tone chirped in her headset, a sweet single note. Her thumb pressed down. A salvo of Hydra rockets shot away from the pods under her wings, streaking toward the ground in a furious blaze. She pulled back hard on the stick, the G-forces pressing her down as she fought to climb away from the ground fire. She didn't see the impacts. She felt them. A series of rapid, concussive thumps that vibrated through the airframe. A quick glance at the targeting pod video feed showed a line of fire and smoke erupting along the edge of the tree line. The advancing infantry squad was swallowed by the dust and debris. It wouldn't kill them all, but it would stop their advance, break their formation, and buy Mako team precious time. Senior Chief Miller saw the rocket's impact from his window. The explosion was close, too close, shaking the very foundations of the control house. But it was a welcome tremor. The relentless pressure from the infantry advance instantly vanished, replaced by the confused shouts of a disrupted enemy. "That's our cue!" he yelled to his team. "They're pinned down! Light them up!" The SEALs, reinvigorated by the aerial support, unleashed a disciplined volley of fire into the smoking chaos, cutting down the disoriented enemy soldiers who stumbled out of the smoke. Ava was climbing, her eyes glued to her threat warning system. A light was blinking. A radar lock. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't from a sophisticated system. It was from a mobile, vehicle-mounted anti-aircraft gun, a ZSU-23-4 known as the Shilka. It had been hiding among the tanks, its radar off until now. The enemy commander was smart. He had waited for her to commit to a low-altitude attack run before revealing his ace in the hole. A harsh, insistent beeping filled the cockpit. She was being tracked. She dumped chaff and flares, a cloud of aluminum strips and burning magnesium erupting behind her aircraft to confuse the radar and heat-seeking sensors. She threw the Warthog into a violent, evasive maneuver, pushing the sturdy airframe to its limits. A stream of glowing shells ripped through the sky exactly where she had been just seconds before. The Shilka was terrifyingly accurate. A near miss rattled the aircraft, the sound of shrapnel pinging against the titanium bathtub that protected her cockpit. Warning lights flickered on her panel. A hydraulic pressure alarm, not critical but a warning shot across her bows. She was no longer an invulnerable angel of death. She was a wounded bird in a sky full of hunters. She broke the lock, diving back toward the relative safety of the dam's shadow, her mind racing. The Shilka changed everything. She couldn't make another low pass without risking being shot down. The Maverick missiles were her only weapon that could engage from a safe distance, but the Shilka was now hidden again, likely having moved after revealing its position. The tanks were still lurking in the village, and the remaining infantry would regroup. The momentary advantage she had won was gone. The battle had reached a stalemate, and the clock was ticking down on her fuel, her ammunition, and the lives of the men trapped in the control house. She needed a new plan, and she needed it fast. The hydraulic alarm was a steady, nagging light on her panel, a constant reminder of her vulnerability. Ava leveled the aircraft, her breathing shallow as she scanned the skies for any further threats. The Shilka had gone quiet, its radar dark once more. It was a patient hunter, waiting for her to make another mistake. She couldn't risk it. The Warthog was tough, but it wasn't invincible. Below, the dam was a silent, hulking monument. The control house a tiny, vulnerable box clinging to its side. The brief respite she had provided with the rocket attack was over. The enemy infantry, though bloodied, had not been wiped out. She could see their thermal signatures regrouping, moving more cautiously now, using the rubble for cover. They were learning. They knew her presence was a temporary thing, a storm that would pass when her fuel ran out. Inside the control house, the mood had shifted from desperate hope back to grim reality. The initial euphoria of the A-10's intervention had faded. Senior Chief Miller listened to the sporadic gunfire outside. It was getting closer again. "Hawkins!" he barked. "What's the word from command?" "Where's that exfil?" The comms specialist shook his head, his face grim. "Nothing, Senior Chief. The JTAC says the northern push is bogged down. No assets available. They're advising us to consider our options." The unspoken meaning hung in the dusty air. They were on their own. Miller looked at his team. They were low on ammo, 2 men had minor wounds, and they were surrounded. He made a decision, the hardest of his career. He keyed his mic, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. "JTAC, this is Mako Actual. Be advised, our position is no longer tenable. Enemy strength is overwhelming. We cannot hold the asset. I am requesting a denial strike. Repeat, prepare for strategic denial of the asset." He was asking command to call in a massive airstrike on the dam itself, to destroy it rather than let it fall into enemy hands. It was a suicide mission. Ava heard the transmission. The blood drained from her face. A denial strike. It meant they were giving up. It meant they were choosing to die to complete the mission. The cold professionalism of Miller's voice was more terrifying than any amount of static or gunfire. "JTAC, this is Reaper, stand by. Do not authorize that strike," she transmitted, her own voice sharp with urgency. "Mako, this is Reaper. I am still on station. I am not leaving you. What is your exact situation?" There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of distant gunfire over the open mic. Then Miller's voice returned, cracked with a fatigue that went beyond the physical. "Reaper, they're in the lower levels. They've breached the generator room. We're falling back to the upper floor. We have maybe 5 minutes before they overrun us. You can't hit them without hitting us. It's over. Get clear!" Ava's mind raced, rejecting the finality in his tone. 5 minutes. She looked at her remaining ordnance. 1 Maverick missile. The cannon was too low for another sustained burst. The rockets were gone. One missile. She had one precise shot to change the outcome of this battle. But the enemy was now mixed in with the SEALs, room to room, inside a massive concrete structure. A missile strike on the building would kill everyone. She needed a target. A high-value target that would break the enemy's will. And then she saw it. On her targeting pod, a new heat signature emerged from the village. It was a command vehicle, a BMP-2, its antenna array spinning. The enemy commander had gotten confident, moving forward to direct the final assault personally. He was positioning himself just outside the control house, in a cleared area near the main entrance. It was a gamble, a show of force, and it was the only chance she had. The command vehicle was a gift, a sudden, arrogant mistake in the enemy's carefully laid plans. Its heat signature bloomed on Eva's screen, a bright, stationary target nestled between two ruined buildings, just 100 yards from the control house's main entrance. This was the brain of the operation. Take it out and the body might just falter. But the shot was impossibly tight. The vehicle was close to the building, terrifyingly close. The margin for error was measured in feet, not yards. A miss, or even a slightly wayward missile, could easily slam into the control house and kill the very men she was trying to save. JTAC Reaper. I have a visual on a command vehicle, Grid Lima 2. I am engaging with my last Maverick. She tried to keep her voice steady, but a tremor of doubt was there. The JTAC's response was immediate and frantic. Reaper, negative. The proximity to friendly forces is too close. The risk is unacceptable. Abort the run! It was the correct call, the by-the-book call. But the book didn't account for the sound of a dying man's breath over the radio. The book didn't have a chapter on what to do when every other option was gone. Mako Actual, this is Reaper, Eva said, ignoring the JTAC. I have a solution, but I need you to confirm the enemy command vehicle is parked at the main entrance, near a destroyed white truck. Acknowledge. She needed to hear his voice. She needed to know they were still in the fight. There was a pause, then the sound of broken glass and a quick burst of gunfire. Miller's voice was a ragged gasp. Reaper! Affirm, we see it! BMP, multiple antennas. He's directing the assault from there. But Reaper, the angle... He understood the risk as well as she did. That's all I need, Eva said, her decision made. She pushed the throttle forward, gaining altitude. She needed to be higher for this, to create a steeper dive angle. A steep dive meant a more precise impact. It also meant she would be a slower, more predictable target for the Shilka, wherever it was hiding. She was trading her safety for a chance at accuracy. The threat warning receiver remained silent, but the silence felt like a trap. She climbed, her eyes fixed on the targeting pod screen. The crosshairs settled over the command vehicle. The Maverick's seeker head chirped, acquiring the heat signature. The tone changed to a steady lock. The word lock flashed on her display. Below, the battle for the control house reached a new crescendo. She could hear the distinct sound of grenades exploding, the frantic shouts of the SEALs as they were pushed back to their final defensive position. They were running out of time. She took a final deep breath, her hand steady on the control stick. This was it. One shot. There would be no second chances. Her thumb hovered over the red launch button on the stick. Every hour of training, every simulation, every moment of her career led to this single, decisive action. She exhaled slowly and pressed the button. The AGM-65 Maverick missile dropped from its pylon with a solid thump. For a heart-stopping second, it seemed to fall, then its rocket motor ignited with a brilliant white flame. It screamed away from her aircraft, a spear of vengeance hurtling towards the earth. Eva held her breath, her entire being focused on the missile's trajectory. It flew straight and true, a line of fire connecting her to the target. It didn't waver. It didn't deviate. It simply vanished into the spot where the command vehicle was parked. The explosion was different from the others. It was a sharp, contained crump, followed by a secondary, much larger detonation as the vehicle's own ammunition cooked off. A fireball rolled into the night sky, lighting up the entire front of the dam. The gunfire from around the control house stopped abruptly. The Shilka remained silent. For a long, terrifying moment, the battlefield was completely quiet. The head of the snake had been cut off. Now they would see if the body would thrash or simply die. The silence that followed the explosion was more unnerving than the battle itself. It was a heavy, ringing void where the only sound was the crackle of the burning command vehicle. Inside the control house, Senior Chief Miller strained his ears, waiting for the next wave of attackers. It didn't come. He risked a glance through a bullet-riddled window. The enemy infantry who had been pressing so hard moments before were falling back, retreating into the village in a disorganized rout. The death of their commander had shattered their will to fight. The immediate threat was over. But the larger problem remained. The Shilka was still out there, and the main enemy force, though leaderless, was still present. They had bought a reprieve, not a victory. High above, Eva felt no sense of triumph. The successful strike had drained her last precision weapon. She was now a guardian with empty hands. Her fuel gauge was dipping into the caution zone. The hydraulic warning light still glowed, a persistent reminder of her damaged aircraft. She had maybe 10 minutes of flight time left before she would have to turn for home, leaving the seals utterly exposed. The JTAC's voice returned, the relief in his tone palpable. Reaper, JTAC. Sensors show enemy forces in disarray. Excellent work. Mako, what is your status? Miller keyed his mic, his voice hoarse but firm. JTAC, Mako, the infantry assault has broken. We are secure for the moment, but we are still pinned. The armor is still in the village, and that anti-aircraft gun is still active. He paused, the reality of their situation settling in. Reaper, you're low on fuel. You need to bug out. You've done more than enough. Eva heard the words, but they felt like a surrender. To leave now would be to abandon them. The enemy would regroup. Without her overhead threat, the tanks would roll out of the village and finish the job. Her brother's hollow eyes flashed in her memory. No one gets left behind. But what more could she do? She was out of options. Then an idea, a desperate, insane idea formed in her mind. It was a bluff, a gamble based on the one thing she had left. The reputation of her aircraft. JTAC, Reaper. Negative on the bug out. I am commencing a show of force. Mako, keep your heads down. This is going to be loud. She didn't wait for a response. She shoved the throttle to the firewall and pointed the nose of the A-10 straight down, not at a target, but at the village itself. She was going to make the lowest, fastest, most aggressive pass she had ever flown. The Warthog screamed toward the earth, its engines roaring at full power. She held the dive until the altimeter screamed its warning, pulling out at the last possible second, so low that her wake turbulence kicked up a storm of dust and debris from the streets. She flew directly over the rooftops where the enemy tanks were hidden, the sheer sonic force of her passage shaking the very foundations of the buildings. She wanted them to feel her presence. She wanted them to look up and see the shark-like grin of the A-10 and believe she was coming for them next. She racked the aircraft into a tight banking turn, the G-forces straining her body, and lined up for another pass. This time, she fired a 1-second burst from her cannon high over the village, the tracers arcing into the distant hillside. It was a warning shot. A message. I am still here. I am still armed. And I am not leaving. On the ground, the effect was instantaneous. The remaining enemy soldiers, already spooked by the loss of their commander, broke completely. The roar of diesel engines echoed through the streets as the tanks, fearing an imminent attack, began to retreat, pulling back from the dam in a frantic, disorganized column. The Shilka remained silent, choosing retreat over a duel it might not win. Eva pulled up, her heart hammering against her ribs, her fuel warning now a persistent, flashing alert. She had played her last card. The bluff had worked. The battlefield was silent once more, but this time, the silence felt different. It felt like peace. The dust settled over the village, stirred up by the wrath of her low passes. The only movement now was the distant, retreating glow of the enemy column's taillights, snaking their way back into the barren hills. The dam stood silent and immense, its integrity secure. In the cockpit, the only sound was the steady whine of the engines and the increasingly insistent chirp of the low fuel warning. The blinking red light was a final, undeniable order. Her part in this fight was over. Eva leveled the aircraft, her body aching with a fatigue that went deeper than muscle. She took one long, last look at the targeting pod display, zooming in on the control house. She could see tiny figures moving cautiously inside, one of them waving an arm from a shattered window. They were alive. They were secure. A profound stillness settled over her, the calm after a storm of impossible decisions. She keyed her mic one final time, her voice stripped of all its earlier tension, leaving only a quiet, professional warmth. Mako Actual, this is Reaper. The sky is clear. Enemy forces are in full retreat. The dam is secure. She paused, allowing the words to sink in for the men on the ground. I am Bingo Fuel, heading for home. There was a moment of static. Then Senior Chief Miller's voice came through, clear and strong for the first time. The gunfire and desperation were gone, replaced by a gravelly emotion that was hard to define. Reaper, this is Mako Actual. Copy all. He stopped, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with a respect that transcended rank or branch of service. Captain, we owe you our lives. That was the finest piece of flying I have ever witnessed. Thank you. Eva felt a lump form in her throat. She swallowed it down, a small, tired smile touching her lips. Just bringing the groceries, Senior Chief. Any time. It was an old, informal aviator's line, a piece of pilot slang that meant she'd simply delivered what was needed. It felt right. Now you bring your team home, safe and sound. Will do, Reaper. Godspeed. Eva banked the A-10 away from the dam, pointing its nose toward the distant horizon where her tanker aircraft would be waiting. The rising sun was just beginning to paint the edge of the sky with streaks of orange and pink. She clicked off the master arm switch. The cockpit fell into a peaceful quiet, the only sounds the hum of the engines and her own steady breathing. The hydraulic warning light still glowed, a testament to the night's trials, but the aircraft held steady, a faithful steed returning from battle. She allowed herself to think of her brother then, not with the old pain, but with a sense of resolution. The ghost that had driven her into this cockpit had been quieted. The promise had been kept. No one was left behind. As she climbed toward the dawn, leaving the dark valley behind, she felt not the thrill of victory, but the deep, quiet satisfaction of a job done, of a debt paid in full. The A-10, scarred and low on fuel, flew on, a solitary silhouette against the brightening sky, carrying its pilot home.